Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
With the first pick, the Detroit Pistons select Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma State University.
Chandler again. Oh, what a block by Maxfield! My goodness!
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
There's Jaden playing the passing lane. Skies a jam. Dynamite dunk, and the crowd loves it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing. Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, back after a 2-week hiatus. Mike Anguilano joined me this week as the full cast and crew. Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia. Fellas, how has it been going? The last 2 weeks, I've missed the last few podcasts. Seems like it's been going okay.
We always miss you, Mike, but it's always great when the full crew can be here, and we've got some good topics to talk about this week. I don't want to spend too much time talking about ourselves because I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk about what we've got to get into, and I know that's why the people are here. So I'm doing good. It's good to be with you fellas, and let's have a show.
Yeah, much like the Pistons president of basketball operations search, my beard is too long, but it's great to have the full cast. You've been gone far too long as well. Let's just get into this, man. We finally have a little something exciting coming up. The NBA lottery is on Sunday. This Sunday. I think we all had to remind ourselves of that.
I had to look it up this morning.
Like, oh wait, that's coming up. I've never been less excited for a potential number one overall pick. Like, I fell to my knees when the Pistons got the number one pick in the 2020 draft when they got Cade. This one, I don't know. I might do a little fist bump. That's about it.
Yeah, I had to look it up, and I put it in our podcast chat of, wait, isn't the draft lottery next week? LOL, it's Sunday. And it is, in fact, Sunday. So we're going to talk a little bit about the draft. We're going to talk a little bit about the not report, because Brian Windhorst hates when people aggregate him, but he did mention that he wouldn't be surprised if the Pistons and the Lakers ended up swapping coaches in some capacity. So we're going to have to touch on that, as crazy as it is. We're probably going to jump around a little bit as well. I'd like to thank our sponsor first for this week's episode, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, NBA, and the NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport that's out there. Head on over to the website today or use your mobile device and to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Our pre-show plugs, of course. Please subscribe to our newsletter at palacepistons.com. That's where you're going to find all of our written content at. That's where you're going to find the podcast going directly into your inbox when it releases. Nice little blurb here about the new weekly newsletter that we have, the Weekly Drive, which is written by me. I've already started to put it together. That hits your inbox every Monday morning. It's short. It's not long. Don't think I'm going to be just riff-raffing for 1,000 words about random stuff. It's really supposed to be something that's short, that is very succinct, captures some NBA news, some Pistons news, and it is in your inbox every Monday to stay up to date. Our Palace Pistons YouTube channel is, we keep uploading the podcast there. It takes 30 seconds to go and like a video and subscribe. It really does help us tremendously, and it's free to you. And of course, all of our socials, which many of you longtime listeners may already know about: Twitter, Instagram, Twitter/X, Instagram, our Facebook page, and our TikTok. Please head on over and subscribe to all of those, or follow them, or like them. It does make a big difference, and it does allow us to interact with you, which is what we all like to do. Guys, let's get into the most bizarre topic of the Pistons realm right now, which is a potential swap of head coaches with the Los Angeles Lakers. So according to Brian Windhorst of ESPN, if there is a change in Detroit at head coach, which again is entirely bent on who the president of basketball operations is going to be, there's a potential that the Los Angeles Lakers could be a team that's looking to go after Monty Williams, and Darvin Ham could be headed to Detroit. Now, obviously, you can't trade the coach because he's already been fired or let go. I mean, maybe there's a technicality there, kind of like a sign and trade, where a guy wants to go to X team, but he can actually re-sign and then get traded and still go to his team. Maybe there is the potential for that, but you can't really trade a head coach necessarily. Monty makes a lot of money. But just the premise, if you take away the money aspect and you take away the Darvin Ham being fired after 2 years aspect, what do you guys make of swapping head coach? Let's talk about getting rid of Monty Williams first, because you'd probably be on the hook for a majority of that money. If they move on from Monty and get a guy like Darvin Ham, what do you guys feel about that sort of move? Because Ham I mean, he got fired from the Lakers. The Lakers are a successful organization. They have higher expectations than what Pistons fans are wanting. Ham made a Western Conference Finals. They made the playoffs. They ran into Denver both times. You can't fault them for that necessarily. But what do you guys think of getting Darvin Ham, swapping him out for Monty Williams, just in a vacuum first, before we get into the money and all that stuff?
I'd have to say I'd be very much unmoved by the whole idea. I think there's a deservedly so desire from many within the Pistons community to move on from Monty Williams. And I think that is a very fair point, a very fair case to make. This team, this Detroit Piston group, this Detroit Piston core has regressed in their first year under Monty Williams. They lost a significant part of their young career for a lot of these guys, for a lot of these young players. And just to have that blind faith that, oh, it'll be better next year, I don't really know if the Pistons are in a position where they can just kind of hope and pray on that and see what happens come next October. I think there has to be, a greater sense of urgency here. And if there is a process in place that is going to give them that idea and that confidence that Williams and his staff and this organization will be better in year 2 and it will get better for the young guys, then so be it. But it's very hard for me to see how that's possible, especially when after such a bad year, a lot of these young players are now being talked about as, well, the Pistons might have to move 1 or 2 of these guys if they're going to get better. So I think, look, you have to look at moving on from Monty Williams, whoever the new president of basketball operations is. But is Darvin Ham really the guy? He had a very, very talented team this year in Los Angeles. I mean, won 47 games with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Obviously, 2 of the most household names in the NBA, with Anthony Davis playing very, very well and being very healthy this year. Not something that's always the case. They had a much better supporting cast this year with guys like Austin Reeves taking a step in his development. They had Rui Hachimura for a full season. They had D'Angelo Russell. They had some guys go down, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, but this was a pretty solid Laker team. I mean, it wasn't like they had a third star next to LeBron and AD, but it was a very, very good team, and they did not put up much of a fight against Denver. If they would have won a couple of games, maybe things would be different. Maybe Darvin Ham would still be employed, but if the Lakers can't win with LeBron and AD, and again, not win the series, but at least put up a real fight, don't give me, they played Denver, really, really tough in all those games. Yeah, congrats that they won the first half of those games. They didn't win the second half when it matters the most. So, look, I'm not all too keen on the idea of Darvin Ham being the savior for the Detroit Pistons. And it's not something that, look, I'm looking elsewhere up on the Pistons. I'll put it that way. I think it would be better for them to look elsewhere if they do move on from Williams. Hard for me to look at Darvin Ham and look at what he's done in Los Angeles and say, yeah, this is the guy that Detroit needs to go out and get.
It comes down to expectations for me. What are you expecting out of these next couple of seasons? Because do I think Darvin Ham is a great coach? No, I don't. I think he's pretty much right in line with what a lot of other NBA coaches who are middle of the pack can offer you at this point in time. That being said, I don't think he's a bad head coach. And let's be frank, Monty Williams is a bad head coach. He has not elevated this team. He's regressed this team. He's made them worse. He's not helped with any sort of development. I think at least with Darvin Ham, you can point to, Austin Reeves has developed. I think Rui Hachimura has played better since he came to Los Angeles. I think that even guys like D'Angelo Russell and to an extent Jared Vanderbilt were able to improve their games in certain ways. He's not a great X's and O's coach. And that's why you saw them lose to a Denver team that, yes, is probably more talented, overall, even if LeBron and Anthony Davis are just a step below, Nikola Jokic at this point in their careers. I still think, it just comes down to, like, do you want a semblance of stability? Do you want somebody who's going to come in and know he's not going to make you a great team, but he's also not going to completely tank your season? Darvin Ham is not going to destroy your roster. I truly don't believe he is going to do something like that, even if he does have his flaws. Or do you want to go for that home run? Like, do you want your Mark Danon? Do you want your Chris Finch? Is that what you're looking for right now, where you're really trying to take a solid step forward? I think it comes down to that kind of mentality. Ham obviously can manage egos. That being said, I don't know how many egos there can be in that Detroit locker room after 14 wins. So for me, no, I would not go for Darvin Ham. That being said, is he the worst name out there? No. Would I rather have him than Frank Vogel, who was just let go today? I don't know. I think I'd probably rather have Vogel as well. So no, I would not go for Ham ultimately, but I think that he's a defensible hire under the right circumstances. And a lot of that comes down to who your president of basketball operations is and exactly what you can do with Monty Williams in his gargantuan contract moving forward.
Yeah, you guys kind of hit it on the head. It depends on who the president of basketball operations is going to be and what the direction of the organization is going to be. Are they going to make a whole bunch of Houston Rockets-esque moves and want to compete right now? And then you're hiring somebody who is like Ime Udoka and has some playoff success, and Ham has that. I mean, whether you want to admit it or not, 2 years, he went deep into the playoffs 1 year and got waxed by a pretty good Denver Nuggets team. I get not wanting to make the hire, and I think Ham has a place in the league still. Whether he joins as an assistant coach or something. There were other teams that were linked to him. The Washington Wizards were linked to him. The Nets were linked to him as an assistant. The Charlotte Hornets were linked to him, probably potentially as an assistant as well. And they just made a hire as well, getting Charles Lee from the Boston Celtics. I wouldn't be super upset if it was Darvin Ham, but it doesn't seem like the right coach to me. I would still rather have a developmental guy, like when we talked about this last year when Dwayne Casey was stepped down / let go / moved to a different role. We were talking about, do we want an NBA playoff ready coach, or do we want somebody like a James Borrego, a Chris Finch, or a Jordi Fernandez, somebody that has the developmental skill set more so than a Monty Williams, who is looking to probably win basketball games and go deep into the playoffs. So I wouldn't be opposed to Ham, but I would prefer somebody more of that ilk. But again, it totally depends on who the Pistons want to bring in for their president of basketball operations and what they want to do with the rest of the team. Because they could really flip the table entirely with the roster and do something like what the Houston Rockets did, which is go for pretty much everybody that's available, get a whole bunch of vets, and try to make the playoffs. So
really quickly, there's been talk of Chauncey Billups potentially being let go in Portland. I think we probably are all on the same page of, I don't think any of us really want a retread at this point. I think we want a guy who has a fresh perspective on the game, who has a fresh perspective on coming into a head coaching position. But that being said, if you had to pick one of those three potential retreads, Ham, Billups, Frank Vogel, who are you guys going for?
Personally, I would take Frank Vogel. When the Chauncey news came out, I put it up on Twitter that I think Chauncey could be a viable option for the Pistons, and I'd imagine he'd be on their list if they did move on from Monty Williams and started talking to new candidates. And I got a lot of backlash right away from people that watch the Blazers or just the NBA in general that were like, Chauncey was actually really, really bad this year. And okay, I'll take the blame there that maybe I wasn't watching a ton of Portland Trailblazers this year. I guess I didn't quite understand how bad it was. But I think Frank Vogel just has the best track record for success. It feels like you can look at his last two stops in LA and in Phoenix and say, this guy was made the scapegoat for two teams that were not the best way. They were not constructed properly, and were trying to appease stars who, as players and the rest of the guys in the team, are never at fault in these situations. It's always on the coach when a team doesn't win X number of games, doesn't win X number of playoff series, doesn't win X number of championships. It's always on the coach. It's never on the players, never on the star players who are pressuring teams to build a roster a certain way, acquire certain players, use the assets that the team has to go out and get these guys despite it making no financial or fiscal sense. So yeah, I think Frank Vogel's been in a couple tough spots in terms of he's been with organizations, he's been with teams that have really just treated him as a scapegoat. And that's not to say he's the perfect coach by any stretch of the imagination, but he has a track record of success, and I would trust him to make progress in Detroit, something that did not happen last year under Monty Williams. That was a team that regressed. The Pistons need to make progress.
Yeah, I would rather have Frank Vogel as well. I feel bad for Chauncey, though, because he was brought in to sort of coach Dame and get them back to the playoffs, and Dame got hurt, and it all fell apart, and then he got handed a roster of sort of misfit toys with DeAndre Ayton. They did get Jeremy Grant, but again, they're just I do feel bad for him. I think that he has a place in the league with a different team if Portland does elect to go in a different direction. I don't think that it should be head coach of the Detroit Pistons for all of the reasons that Aaron discussed. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense other than the fact that you're bringing a Piston legend home to be the Pistons head coach. I am kind of surprised that there was very little talk of him even moving into a front office role, because bringing up my Cleveland Cavaliers again, there was a period of time when David Griffin was let go, Dan Gilbert was pushing hard for Chauncey Billups to be the general manager and take over. That I maybe could see, a front office advisor role of some sort, but I don't see it as head coach. So I'd rather have Frank Vogel out of that bunch, but that's a tough one.
Yeah, I don't love any of those names either. And I think that based on what you guys are saying and how I see it as well, I think that just underlines the point that the Pistons need to bring in somebody new, like a new voice, a new head coach, somebody who is going to, at very least, stagger their lineups. I mean, for God's sake, somebody who pays attention to analytics, somebody who has fresh takes on the game. I don't think that's JJ Redick, but that being said, you need to go out and you need to find that person.
We have a bit of breaking news.
Oh,
I wish we had a soundboard. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski has reported that the front runner for the Phoenix Suns head coaching job is Mike Budenholzer.
Okay.
Another retread.
Doesn't really swing the coaching
carousel. I don't want him either.
It is a retread.
I don't want him either.
I think what everyone wants is where can the Pistons find their Mark Daigneault? Where can the Pistons find their Chris Finch? Where can the Pistons find their Taylor Jenkins? where can they find this new coach that's not been a head coach 2, 3, 4 times over and has been fired for umpteen different reasons? Where can they find the young coach that hasn't been brought into the spotlight yet, but is just waiting for that opportunity to find himself on a young team in a good organization and make very strong progress within a few years? Like, I don't think the Pistons or the fans are asking for the Pistons to go out and find this coach that's going to turn this team to, into a contender within a couple of years. One, because that's not feasible, and two, because it's not on the coach to do that alone. There has to be a lot of other factors that work with that. But I think people want a coach that is going to be worth having around for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and not keep falling into this cycle of, after 1 or 2 seasons, you're looking at needing a new coach. And within year 2, you're talking about, oh, this guy's not the right fit. This guy hasn't made the right progress. This guy's misutilizing this core guy or that core guy. They need to find a guy that is going to be part of this culture, that's going to be part of this shift in direction for this organization. And that's what I think is way more appealing than going after one of these retreads that have been on 3, 4, 5 teams at this point. It's just not going to have the same effect. The best coaches in the NBA right now are these younger guys that are just getting their first or second opportunity. I'll throw Ime Udoka in there simply because he was very, very good in Boston before his incident. So the Pistons need to go out and find one of those guys. I think that's way more important than looking at Frank Vogel or Darvin Ham or bringing back Monty Williams for another go around. Like, they need to find their guy.
We should move on. That being said, there is one guy that last year was on the list, I think pretty far down on it, but I want to bring up again, who I'm still interested in, Jerron Collins out of New Orleans. I think you look at their track record of developing wings, especially in terms of defense. I think when you have a player like Asar Thompson in town, I think when you have a younger team, having somebody like that who is really going to be, the key in locking down your defensive capabilities, your standards, building an identity. I think Jerron Collins is a name I'm still very interested in. And when they do eventually make that Pobo hire, if they do let go of Monty Williams, I would not be surprised to see him on the list again. So we should move on. But I just want to throw that out there again, like, especially with Charles Lee now going to the Hornets. Kevin Ollie working out exactly how we thought Kevin Ollie would in Brooklyn. I think that Jerron Collins absolutely still should be on the list. I know the Pelicans did not do well in the playoffs, but there was extenuating circumstances. And at this point, God, I would kill to get to the point the New Orleans Pelicans are. Also, if they do decide to trade for Brandon Ingram, that could be a very, very useful relationship to have. So I'm just thinking about it from that perspective.
I was going to say, are Jerron Collins and Brandon Ingram a package deal? I mean, maybe.
Well, combined, they have the same salary as Monty Williams. So you could do a 1-for-1, 2-for-1 on that one.
And Bryson Graham was listed as a potential Pobo option for the Pistons as well to link another Pelicans. I know he is kind of
the beast.
I haven't heard a whole lot about him. It seems like it's been centered a whole lot on Tim Connolly and John Horst mostly, but if the Wolves make it even farther, I just can't see Tim Connolly leaving.
Yeah,
that sort of situation.
Just for a minute, because I know we got to move on here. But if the Pistons land Tim Connolly after what he did in Denver and now Minnesota, is he at this point just trying to build a championship team and then move to another organization and build a team good enough to beat that team? I mean, that would be as much of a home run hire as a home run hire could be. I can't imagine that that's a feasible option. I know it's been reported that they'd like him. But wow, if the Pistons could land Tim Connolly after what he's done in Denver and now Minnesota, that would be a hell of a coup.
I think you're praying that the Timberwolves ownership situation is what dictates that, right? You have to be hoping that Glenn Taylor and A-Rod and that whole situation, that it just becomes untenable and he goes, I God knows I've left jobs before because I'm like, ownership here is not, I like this place. Ownership does not work for me. On that. So, hey, who's to say he wouldn't do the same thing and get a chance to build another contender? Knock on wood.
Yep. Well, let's do just what we were saying we were going to do like 4 minutes ago and move on to our next topic, which is, hey, the NBA draft. The lottery is on Sunday. Imagine that. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Pistons have a 14% chance at the number 1 overall pick. They have a 40-ish% chance to get the number 1 overall pick. The worst they could do is 5th. This is a relatively weak draft. I spoke about it briefly in the weekly drive last week about how there is an executive who was on the record to say that this is the worst draft he's ever seen. I think that's a little bit hyperbole, a little bit of hyperbole, because that's just, there are good players here. You know, there's just no Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, list of just jewels at the top end, but there's still good players there. So by the time we talk next, the Pistons are going to have their draft fate already decided of where they're picking. So for today, we're just going to talk about what if they land the first overall pick. It would be so Pistons of them to land the first overall pick in the worst perceived draft possible. So let's just assume that they are going to get the first overall pick. And I guess before we get into specific players, because we're each going to talk about someone, if the Pistons get the first overall pick, given the situation that they are in with their roster, with a president of basketball operations coming in, probably a new general manager, prayer circle, hopefully a new general manager, and potentially a new head coach, and potentially dangling a bunch of players to acquire a star. If the Pistons land pick number 1, are you guys in the camp of they should trade the number 1 overall pick?
Yes, I am in the camp of the Pistons should be trying to leverage whatever number pick they land as part of a package to get a win now type of player to improve this roster. Again, and this is because this draft is considered to be so poor. You know, the number 1 pick isn't going to land you the typical star, all-star type player that it does in other years. You might have to attach more than, you might have to attach a significant core piece alongside it to get an all-star level guy, in the market this year, whether that's Brandon Ingram or DeJounte Murray. I know those are some of the popular names that often get talked about as, those guys that the Pistons might be able to go after. But yeah, the Pistons should be using that as a trade chip. I think all things considered, I think they need to take a major step forward next year. It's easier to do that if you're leveraging some of your assets into guys that are going to be able to play around and greatly help Cade Cunningham, your franchise guy. So I would be trying to leverage that pick into something else. But, there's also a world where they obviously do use it. And I think that they can still improve the team, obviously, by using it. But I think trading it makes more sense for the future.
There's definitely there's a lot that goes into this. One, it depends who's looking for what. This is a very point guard and big man have top heavy draft here. So I think that there are certain teams that if they are inclined to move off their stars, I think that there is definitely opportunity. I look at, like we've mentioned, the Pelicans as definitely being a team that could be looking to draft, say, like an Alex Sarr type, move on from Valanciunas. Maybe Brandon Ingram becomes available there, as they do still have a glut of wings on the roster. I think maybe if the Clippers decide to blow it up this year, that could also be a potentially intriguing destination for the number 1 overall pick. Perhaps they decide to move on from, Paul George and Zubac. I don't know. I think that there's definite opportunity to move that pick to some teams that might need that top of the draft help. Not necessarily looking to fully rebuild, but take a step forward while also shoring up their assets for the future, kind of taking a bite out of each apple, if you will. So while I think I personally would prefer to hold on to the pick, I just think it gives you more leverage moving forward. And the reason is because I'm just not all that enthralled with a lot of the young talent the Pistons have on this roster. And I do think there are a couple of guys at the top of this draft that if the Pistons do get number one pick, they should really be looking at. A couple of guys that do fit that mold. If you're getting the third pick, I think the math changes a little bit for me, and I'm probably shopping it. But I think if I get the number one overall pick, I personally have a player that I'm very, very interested in the Pistons acquiring because I think he both is the most talented player and also fits the Pistons' needs the best.
It's funny that you say that because I almost think I'd be more inclined to keep the pick if they ended up falling to like 4 or 5. Again, because I think there's a specific player there that you can take at 4 or 5 that even in this year's draft is probably not the number one pick. But that's interesting. I think it's funny that we're kind of on the flip side of that. But I'm ready to talk about these prospects.
I don't like this mid-lottery. I don't really like it, but I know there's a couple players you do. So let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Jasper, you would keep the pick, so why don't you go first? Who would you take number one overall?
For me, I'm looking at Zachary Rizashea. I think that this is the only guy with the number one pick that I would really be like, okay, cool. I think you did something that's going to, at very least, produce a high-level NBA player here. There's a lot of other talents. Let's not get it twisted, and we're going to talk about a couple of them. But for me, I think Rizashea, he just fits exactly what the Pistons need. He's 6'8", he's 19 years old. He shot pretty dang well from outside in EuroLeague. I mean, let's see. I have his stats in front of me. For his career, 207 3-point attempts. He's shooting 40%. I know he didn't shoot as well from three this last year, but like he has way more of a track record than any of the other guys who are being mentioned at the top of this draft in terms of shooting. He fits another need for them. Like, I think you can slot him in at small forward or power forward, which we've been talking about the lack of wings on this roster for how long? If you can put him, and he's a slightly less athletic, explosive player, alongside Thompson, I think you're instantly looking at a front court that is deadly defensively. Rizashea, to me, is, I know a lot of people love Alex Sarr's defense. I think Rizashea has probably more defensive upside in terms of what like NBA players, especially on the wing, are asked to do. I think he could be a really, really useful piece for this organization. And even if he doesn't blossom into a superstar, like I said, he fits that need. You need wings. You need talented wings. And the Pistons defense has just been so bad over the last few years. I think if you can put two guys together on that perimeter who can also bang a little bit inside, who can play a little bit of power forward, so you can go small or you can play big with both of them, to me, that's setting you up for a very versatile roster and one that can really work around a player like Cade Cunningham, who needs slashers, who needs cutters, who needs shooters. For me, Rizashea is the only slam dunk at the top of the draft, for me. That being said, there are other interesting players. I just think that he's the only one that really fits what I'm looking for, unless you're a big fan of Alex Sarr and you're really, really ready to move on from Jalen Duren.
Aaron, that's a softball of a segue.
It pains me to say this because I know the Pistons have such a checkered history using their first-round draft pick on a player from France. But if I were picking one right now and had to make a draft pick, had to make a selection, Alex Sarr is my choice for the Detroit Pistons. And here's why. 7 foot tall, 7'4.5" wingspan, has a very good projection on the defensive side of the floor. Somewhere that if the Pistons are ever going to seriously get better, they have to improve on that end. One of the biggest pain points this year was this team's interior defense led under Jalen Duren, which was very, very poor. Sarr projects to be really, really good defensive big. There's a world where he can play, at the 5, obviously, but there's also a world where he could play at the 4. That's probably more dependent on him extending out with his range and becoming more of a shooter. He can do a little bit, but he's not a 3-point shooter yet or anything like that. But there's a world where you can make him and Jalen Duren work down the line, and this pick could also serve as a motivational factor for Jalen Duren to either, hey, you're figuring it out here, or you're going to be coming off the bench, or you're going to be gone. So I think Sarr just has a lot of the intangibles that I think stand out the most to me in a draft that doesn't have a clear-cut number 1 guy or a guy with clear-cut star capability. He's got the size. He's got the athleticism. He's got the mobility. He's got the defensive acumen of a player that is going to have a good career in the NBA. There's the stuff he can do in flurries. He can shoot the mid-range jumpers, at times. He's comfortable bringing the ball up the floor, trying to go coast to coast, can finish at the rim, obviously. So, is he the flashiest number 1 pick? Definitely not. I think a guy like Richache has more of that flashiness to him, playing on the wing, having some of the explosiveness that he has, having the 3-point shooting numbers that he has despite going through a cold stretch in the middle of his season. But I think Sarr just is a little bit safer. His ceiling is a little bit safer, and he helps this team on a side of the floor where they really, really do need help. And one other thing that I'll add here is, if Troy Weaver's still around, if the Pistons are still operating with that mindset of, wanting to play 2 bigs on the court together, that potential is there with Sarr and Duren. It's not going to look good offensively, but it just would kind of fall in line with the Pistons' way of working under Troy Weaver. Despite that, meaning you're probably looking at a starting front court of Ausar Thompson, Alex Sarr, and Jalen Duren. Not that that's a lock to happen or anything, but the Pistons will go to that at some point if all 3 of those guys are on the roster next year. But that's another thing to keep in mind. The Pistons love that idea of playing with 2 bigs. Sarr projects as a guy that's going to be able to play the 4 and the 5. But it overall, I think Sarr is probably the safest option at number 1. And as scary as it is buying stock of a guy that the Pistons could use a 1st-round pick of that's from France, there's definitely no history that suggests that would be a bad idea. And there's definitely no history that has me saying that the Pistons should use the number 1 pick in the draft on a guy from France. There's definitely none of that out there, but I am saying it here. I think Alex Sarr should be the guy for the Pistons should they land the top pick in the 2024 NBA draft.
Well, I wouldn't have minded if they had used the number 1 pick last year on a Frenchman. I'll tell you that much.
Fair. Would have been nice.
Would have been nice. A Frenchman that won Rookie of the Year and was nominated for Defensive Player of the Year in his rookie year, which is insane.
Finished second, and I think you could make the very strong argument he should have been first. I was watching a highlight clip the other day of just players like dribbling to the basket and seeing Victor Wembanyama and going, nope, just dribbling straight back out to the perimeter.
Yeah. And I don't blame them. When he dunked over, who did he dunk over on the Miami Heat? It just Thomas Bryant. And Thomas Bryant looks back and is like, what do you want me to do? Yeah, just a freak. Last year's draft. You were so painful. They're probably going to get the first pick this year. So it's a good thing that we're doing this. Yeah, Sarr is probably up there with my pick as well. Because I think that does allow you to move on from Duren and feel a little bit more comfortable about it. As someone who watches a dual big starting lineup, I for one don't want to watch a dual big starting lineup anymore, and I don't believe in it. Unless you have very specific personnel, like unless you're getting Dirk at the 4, then I don't think it's going to work. But that's a very specific case. So I'm going to go off the beaten path. I'm going to go with friend of the pod, Tim Forkin's favorite player in this draft, and that's Dalton Connect. NBA Draft.net has him number 3. I've seen him go anywhere from 4 to 11 in a lot of mock drafts. And that's the other thing. When you look at mocks for this draft, they are just all over the place. There are guys going, like Sar is going 3 in one draft, or 1 in CBS Sports. He's going 12th in another draft. It's just, it's insane. But I'm going to go with Dalton Connect. I think he's the most NBA ready. And I'm operating under the assumption the Pistons are going to want to compete, or at least not be the worst team in the league, and put together good players. And they're going to want to do it fairly like soon, like now, like trading Ivy Duran, get an NBA ready guy. And Dalton Connect kind of fits right into that. He is older. He's already 23 years old. But he is probably one of the most polished players in the draft. He is a guy that you don't have to worry about with getting his own shot. He can handle that on his own, which some Pistons had some trouble doing outside of Cade Cunningham and occasionally Jaden Ivey. 6'6", has a pretty good wingspan. He's a crafty finisher. He's not afraid to shoot the ball. He can go up and get a lob. He's not a standout defender, but I think you're willing to take that risk with a guy who can go out and get his own shot, who's not afraid to shoot the ball, not afraid to shoot from deep. He gets to the free throw line at a pretty good rate. And again, he's more of a vet. So if the Pistons are keeping their pick, but moving on from Duran, moving on from Ivy, packaging them up with future assets or whatever to try to get a win now player, a guy like Dalton Connect, you just slot right in there at the 2 or the 3. Says he's guard, small forward. He can fit the 2 or the 3. That would push Asar Thompson maybe up to the 4, which we've kind of talked about as him being able to do. And then you have a really lanky starting lineup. And I think that at least presents a wrinkle that the Pistons may not have had if they would go with a standard pick like Sar, who does make a lot of sense, but he's younger, he's more unfinished. And French thing, we're a little spooked by the whole French, but if it was me, I would take Dalton Connect, see how it goes. I think he slots in really well for what the Pistons are trying to do. And you could probably trade back and, still be able to get him. And that would be acceptable to me as well.
Yeah, that's who I was alluding to when I talked about, if the Pistons fell to 4 or 5, like I'd be comfortable using that pick because there's a world where Dalton Connect is my number 1 pick as well. I just maybe don't have the courage to go out there and say it. I really do like him. And I think he's such a plug and play type of guy. It's so easy to envision him coming in day one and helping this team right away. It makes sense in terms of fit so much with this team. Like, when will the Pistons just employ a lineup around Cade of guys that can shoot? Like, I mean, I think to use a Twitter term, a lineup of Cade Cunningham, Dalton Connect, Simone Fontecchio, Asar Thompson, and either Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duran, like that lineup would feed families, as they say on X. So I wish the Pistons would embrace the idea of putting more shooters around Cade. I think there's been so much talk about, is Cade 1, is Cade 2, does he need another ball handler out there? Like, we've never really seen this team just say, yes, Cade, you are the ball handler, but we're also going to put guys out there that fit around you, that make it easier for you to initiate the offense, go out and be the player that you are, and let's put guys that fit around you. They haven't. They've put out all these guys that want to handle the ball in spurts, but aren't the best finishers at the rim, aren't the best shooters, don't defend well. And that's why they took, that's part of the reason why they took such a big step back last year. So getting a guy like Connect makes so much sense for this team. And if there's a world where, they land the number 1 pick and they can trade back to 4, 5, 6, 7 and get something else back and still being able to get Connect, like that would be I think a really successful operation for the Pistons. So I like where your head's at, Mike.
If I can add one more thing real fast before Jasper jumps in, because I saw the unmute and the mute. Cunningham, Ivy, Thompson, Stewart, and Duran, Dalton Connect would be the oldest among those players. He's older than all of them at 23. So
wow,
let's put that into perspective, that a rookie would be the actual adult in the room.
He's older than Stewart?
Yeah,
Isaiah
Stewart's
Stewart
younger
is
than-
22 years old.
Yeah, Stewart's younger than Cade, I'm pretty sure, right?
Cade is
year
just a hair younger.
Okay.
Isaiah Stewart's going into year 5, and he's younger.
He's young, man.
Dalton Connect. Wow. But like that doesn't faze me with just this draft again. Like the whole if someone were to say Dalton Connect's too old, you can't take a 23, 24-year-old with a top pick. Like, who's the young guy in this draft that you absolutely have to have? Like, again, no one in this draft screams star to me or anything. Like, go get a guy that can help you get better and come in and play for you right away. That's what Connect is for Detroit and for any team that drafts him. Like, there's no reason to draft Dalton Connect and feel like, oh, we're going to have to take it slow with him. It's going to take a couple years before he can play for us. No, he's got the skill set to go out there and play for you right away. And I think that's what makes him such an appealing target for Detroit, as well as just being such a good fit with the shooting and the offensive skill set that he has.
I don't disagree with that. Genuinely. Like, I think much like the rest of Europe in 1805, you're justified in being afraid of the French, right? So if you do get the number 1 pick and you don't love either Sarr or Reza Shea, and you do look at a guy like Connect, I'm not necessarily opposed to him, but I think if you're going to take him, you have to be trading down. Like, you have to. And I think that's where you can really perhaps talk yourself into, moving down a little bit in the draft. The problem is I just don't know who is trying to move up in this draft, right? Like, this is just not one of those situations where it's like, oh, we need a top 3 pick. No, like, unless you absolutely love Alex Sarr, or you're like, oh, I need a Nikola Topic. Like, I just can't see any of those teams in the lottery feeling that way. Perhaps, like, I don't even know. I'm genuinely trying to think, like, who would be so inclined as to move up in this draft in order to get one of those guys. Perhaps, like, I'm thinking maybe Charlotte. Like, maybe you could trade with Charlotte. If they hadn't paid, what's his name again? The Austrian, Jakob Poeltl, perhaps you could see the Toronto Raptors wanting to trade up a little bit. Like, I could see the Raptors maybe wanting to go out and get a big man, maybe go out and get themselves a point guard. But the problem is with this draft, there's like 5 point guards that you could justify taking in the top 7, 8 picks of this draft. So I just think a trade down is going to be very difficult. And that's, like you said, Aaron, maybe there is a world in where you're almost kind of hoping you get the 4th, 5th pick, because it makes your decision a lot easier in that sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, I think if you're picking at 1, you're probably, despite there not being a top pick, a top guy in this draft class, there's still probably like a top 3 tier that's probably safely ahead of everyone else. Maybe it extends to 4 or 5 guys, but like, I just don't know if someone like Dalton Connect, as much as I like him personally, I don't know if he's in that grouping. Like, Sarr is, Risha Shea is, Topic probably is, and then like, are the 2 Kentucky guards, Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepherd, in there? And then is everyone else after that just kind of like a 5 through 14 type of situation? I don't know. Like, there is a team you would obviously be able to trade back out of 1 to 5, 6, or 7. It's just like, are you getting anything of that much value to trade back? Like, you could just take Alex Sarr and say, we've got a defensive foundational piece long term with this guy, and it allows us to kind of set the clock back at the center position. If we don't want to trade Jalen Duren, or if we don't want to pay Jalen Duren, we can trade him. We can bring him off the bench. We can try something else. Now we don't have to go out and try to spend $25 million a year on Nicholas Claxton. There's a world where that just makes sense. But if there's a way to get back a useful player, if you can get a team that lands at 6 or 7 or 8. Like, I don't even know. Gary Trent might be a free agent this year, but like, if you could get Gary Trent in the sixth pick and use that pick to get Dalton Connect, like, I don't know. Maybe if you liked Connect as a, your was in your top 3 on your big board, maybe that makes sense because you're now getting another good player, or another useful rotation guy in Gary Trent that, can come in and play minutes on the wings and can shoot and score the ball a little bit. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud there, but maybe there's a world where that makes sense. It's just the value has to be there to trade back. Otherwise, it probably just makes sense to take a Richeche or a Sar and go from there.
Like, even if you could guarantee me that Dalton Connect will develop into prime JJ Redick, I can't justify spending the number 1 overall pick on that. Like, I just not. There's too many other positions on the floor that are more important. And I know shooting matters. And I know, especially for this team, shooting matters. I can't justify passing up on a greater potential talent at a more meaningful position at small forward, at just the forward position, the wing position, because that's really what it is now. Small forward, power forward, shooting guard to a certain extent, they don't matter as much. I just think I have to take Richeche there. I just have to. I like Sar. I can see the justification, but like, how many times have I said it on this podcast and in real life? You win on the wings in the NBA. And when you look at the wings in this draft, to me, there's only one who has actual star potential. It's Richeche. So I have to take that risk. I have to.
I'll add one more thing, and then I'll let you guys give your last comments, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. But just looking at the mock and outside the lottery is still, a little bit in flux because of playoff seeding and whatnot. But teams that, I could potentially see moving up or trying to move up, if the Hawks decide they want to blow it up and move on from Trae Young and move on from DeJounte Murray and re-sign Jalen Johnson and see what they could do with that, that's a team that I think, well, one, they could probably trade Trae Young and Murray and be able to move up to wherever they want to move up. I think the Bulls are a team that if they decided to blow it up, they might do something rash and try to move up. Like if they are at 5 and they think, well, what is it going to cost us to get up to 1? I don't know what that trade looks like. Just in a vacuum, I could see them trying to do something to speed up the rebuild that they should have started like 3 years ago. The Miami Heat, I don't have a rock solid source, but I've heard rumblings that Jimmy Butler could be on the move. And after Pat Riley just dismissed him very flatly, it wouldn't surprise me if they, decide to move on from Butler and build around Harrell and Jaime Jaquez and do their Miami Heat thing where they're going to be good in 2 years because that's just how it works with them. That's less likely, but the Bulls and the Hawks, I think, are two teams that right now, I think they're somewhere between 10 and 14 because they're both of the play-in teams. If they decide, this isn't going to work, Trae Young changes agents. DeJounte Murray was on the block last year. Those are two teams I think could want to speed up their, even if the Pistons land at 3, if somebody becomes available, if Dalton Connect is at 3 and they get an offer from Atlanta to move up or Chicago to move up and do that, I mean, that's at least something that the Pistons would have to entertain it depending on whatever you are going to get back. So
I'll say this. I'm sorry, if just real quick,
no.
You
go ahead,
come out this draft having traded the number 1 pick to Atlanta and you somehow get back DeJounte Murray and you get the chance to draft Ron Holland, like, new Pobo. I'm a big fan.
Take the risk.
I would happily do something like that. If you could move Ivy in the number 1 pick for Murray and you get back Ron Holland or something like that, like, I'd be super duper into it. I would very much.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, I think you're not in a position where you need as many bullets in the chamber as possible, and doing something like that, a consolidation move that we've talked about for like 3 years now at this point, a consolidation move that gets you higher quality players like a Murray, like a Trae Young, not a Zach LaVine. But players that are NBA ready, plug in and play. You're not banking on 17, 18, 19-year-old kids to develop in 4 to 5 years, which is kind of the turn off for me for some of the younger international players, because you're pushing your timeline further and further out when your timeline is already kind of super late as it is. But yeah, if you can get a Ron Holland at 10 or 11 and you get DeJounte Murray, I mean, that's a huge, huge win and something that the Pistons would have to do. And I'd be very disappointed if I found out that they passed on that to take, Sarr at 1.
Yeah, like I said at the top of the show, or at the top of this discussion, I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Pistons to be trying to leverage wherever they land in the draft, wherever they land in the lottery. They should be trying to leverage that into a win now player, whether they are able to use that pick solely to do so, or they have to attach a core guy not named Cade Cunningham to do so. All options should be on the table for the Pistons to improve this team around Cade Cunningham if they're going to take this step forward. If they're going to move forward with Cade Cunningham as this franchise guy that I think most people feel that he is, like, not to go off on a tangent, but you look at the former number 1 picks, like guys like Anthony Edwards, guys like Paolo Banchero, like they've been handed the reins. They've been given a team that's built around them and built to allow them to be the best player that they can be. And they are flourishing. And the Pistons have done the exact opposite with Cade Cunningham. So there can be all that talk on Cade's not lived up to being the number 1 pick. Cade's not been that number 1 pick type of guy like Banchero or Edwards have been. But if you look at the teams that those guys have been given and the team that Cade Cunningham has been given year in and year out, there's a direct correlation in why they are succeeding and why they are flourishing, and why Cunningham is just trying to essentially tread water with such a poor roster construction and unstable organization around him. Things have to change, and one way that does is for the Pistons to say, look, we're committed to you, Cade. We're committed to getting this thing turned around, and we're going to use some of our assets to find a way to get guys that best suit you and helping turn this thing around.
Yeah, even if you do take a project, the priority this offseason after that has to be building up the roster. There's no question about it. And I'm glad you brought up Anthony Edwards and Paolo Banchero, because those are 2 guys who are seeing their team succeed, and people can create all the narratives they want. But when you look at the per 100 numbers, when you look at the efficiency numbers, Cade's right there with them. He's right there with them. And the difference is coaching and roster construction. So I think we're going to kind of end this podcast on the same tone that we started it with. Pistons absolutely need to figure out those 2 aspects this offseason, because if they don't, it's going to get a lot uglier before it gets.
Yeah, someone who just watched 7 games of the Orlando Magic, they need a shooter so freaking bad. And as soon as they get somebody that can do that, even semi-regularly, they're going to be terrifying, because Paolo is that dude. He showed that in Game 7 with 38 points. He is that dude, and he's ready. And that's kind of where we thought the Pistons were going to be with Cade after a couple of years of, hey, they augmented their roster around him, but it just hasn't worked out. Hopefully, they are taking a different approach this offseason with a new president of basketball operations. And we're going to know in a week where they're going to be picking, and we'll be able to talk in greater detail about where the Pistons are going to be going and what direction they are going to be moving, and where they're going to be making a draft pick. And who knows, maybe if they get 5 again, rolls eyes strongly into the back of my head to where my head falls off, then we could maybe just take a player that fits a little bit better. But guys, anything else before we wrap up this edition of the podcast?
No, here's what I'll end with, right? The lottery's Sunday. We'll have more content coming Monday, as soon as Monday, with Mike's weekly drive email, and then I'll have something shortly after that in your email feeds on who the Pistons could take with whatever pick they land on in the draft lottery. So you need to go to palaceofpistons.com and go take 25 seconds to type in your email, hit subscribe. It's free. and you're going to benefit from it. So take that 30 seconds, help us out, and get that content directly to your inboxes. We're going to have it coming right after the lottery on Sunday.
Yep. You expect more from us, especially after this Sunday when the Pistons solidify where they'll be taking. We'll have a little bit more for you on that. We'll definitely be talking about prospects, who we want. And I think of this as the amuse-bouche of our draft breakdown. This is just a little taste. We'll be giving you the full meal soon enough. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's not the sexiest draft, but you know what? It's an important one. So we will definitely be on that. Look forward to more from us coming soon. My God, talking is difficult.
That's a sentiment to end the show when all of the words just get thrown into a blender. Yes, as Aaron said, please throw your email address in to subscribe to our Substack. If you're watching on YouTube, it's in the description of the show. Follow us on Twitter. Our TikTok continues to grow. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, but the support that we get, I know we say this every week, but the support we get from all of the listeners, it doesn't go unnoticed, and it helps us a whole lot. It really does. So with that, I guess we're going to come to a close for this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's show, and that is Bet Online. Be sure to go to Bet Online. They've been a dutiful sponsor for a long time. Always happy to have them as our sponsor for the show. So for my co-hosts, Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia, I'm Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. We will see you all next time.